drink, have some good food, and in the company of good people, they would discuss very important issues. Things like love, friendship, war, peace, ethics, aesthetics, beauty, friendship, justice, religion, mathematics, all of those things. And the idea was that at the end of the night, the guests who are attending that party would leave with a new understanding of the topic. And so that's the hope that I'm starting with today, that at the end of our conversation tonight, we will help you take another step up in your understanding and also in your engagement of the topic of artificial intelligence. Because it is, on the one hand, a very broad topic, as you will see tonight, but it's a very important topic that we cannot escape, even if we go hide in a cave, I believe. So I'm very happy today to start our introduction of our guest panelists and ask first Jay to begin by introducing herself and just a couple of words on the format. So we are going to go through about 2 minutes personal introduction of each panelist so that all of you guys can share what you're working on, who you are, and what you're all about for a couple of minutes. And then we're going to just start the conversation about artificial intelligence. So today, I want to start with Jay, because in a way, you were actually a pioneer when you joined, I think, Purdue Computer Science. You were the first and only woman in that department. And I guess that created all kinds of pressures and expectations. And you know, I do a lot of these panels, and most of the time it's actually a bunch of guys. So it's very nice today when we have another perspective. And usually we're all white, which is also doesn't help. Please, Jay.
I was recounting to Paul that I've actually seen the birth of computer science and artificial intelligence and data mining and workflow and all that over the last few decades. When I went to graduate school, computers were about as big as this room. But in all of this work, I began as a technologist and as an academic, and took my research and became an entrepreneur in workflow automation. Decades later, I realized that workflow automation actually put people out of jobs. And now I'm in my fourth phase of reinventing myself, creating a platform for social interaction and knowledge creation, much like the Agora that Nick talked about, where people come together and create knowledge through social interaction. So in this final phase of reinventing myself, I'm calling it Arthapedia.zone. I view this as an open platform for regional interaction and knowledge creation. Thank you.
Thank you. So why don't we start from the beginning of the table then and start moving this way.
Sure.
So first there we have Andrew.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Konya. I spent most of my time doing theoretical physics at Kent State. During grad school at Hackathon, I built some AI, or I guess it was just crude machine learning with an interface wrapped around it. And from there, I've been doing AI research, and I guess now what we call applied AI, because we now build it into our products that we sell. So my background is very theoretical and mathematic, but now I'm learning how to interact with people.
And you do consulting on how to use artificial intelligence for peacemaking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So I work for / at the United Nations, and we work on lead a team that is building a system to take all of the knowledge that's created within there. So every document, every conversation that gets logged, the outcomes that happen from different permissions, put them all into one knowledge base, and then build a query engine on that knowledge base that does two things. One, that allows you to query it with natural language, or as close to natural language as we can get, because most people at the UN don't speak NoSQL. And the second is to then be able to find, basically infer patterns, which is to say be able to extract insights that are coming out of that data. And then the third piece that we have not built yet, that we'll probably start working on in maybe 6 months, 8 months, I hope, which is to then take all of that and start to be able to do things predictably. So when violence happens, the UN's role is to basically understand what actions it can take, and of the actions it can take, to pick the one that is most likely to have the best outcome. And so imagine it's actually well formulated already as a machine learning problem, which is to say, what is the space of all actions? And that's based on the previous knowledge base, and it's legally legal. And then from there to look at past outcomes and understand what of the ones are most likely to yield the best response. And so right now, because that process takes order of magnitude days, weeks, it means that lives are lost in the meantime. So the idea that we're working towards is that if we can make that process move from weeks down to minutes, hours in a way that's automated, then in that time gap lives can save. So that's my most recent.
Thank you, Andrew. Doug?
So I'm Doug McCollough. I have a deep interest in much of this subject, but I'm here today really representing a local government, not federal government, local government, representing a local government. But the public sector and kind of the interaction with the public is a deep interest of some of these topics. So Dublin, Ohio is right outside of Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, Ohio, winner of the Smart Cities Challenge, now known as Smart Columbus. Dublin, Ohio, Marysville, Ohio, and Union County, Ohio are the council of governments that are part of the 35-mile stretch of highway, Ohio highway that is part of the Smart Mobility Corridor. We're doing significant experimentation with autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, and Dublin, Ohio is really working a lot and trying to be very advanced when it comes to technology. We have a lot of fiber, we have a lot of intelligence and smart technologies. We're doing a lot with IoT and many of those things. So I try to, when I'm on a big panel, to be a little bit more provocative, because no one wants to see a panel of a bunch of people who all agree with each other. But please don't throw things at me when I say government. You know, the point here is that we're standing in local government at the front door of a lot of this technology. We can release it to the public, or we can stand back and say, whoa, I'm a little concerned about that. So some of the subject matter expertise in academia and government, it's people yet who are holding off on some of this and not turning the switch on. Because the technology is there, it's ready. We can use it to identify faces and to find criminals and to do all sorts of things that we think are important. And it's very important that we as a society mature quickly so that we can instruct our government appropriately with how to use these tools. So that's kind of the conversation I'd love to have.
Thank you, Doug. Mark is another philosopher, so I already feel kinship towards you. So I put my biases usually straightforward so that they're very clear and obvious for everybody, because we all have them. And as Dr. Marvin Minsky used to say, if you have a programming and you know what the bias is by inputting it in advance, then you know what the bias is. But if you remove the bias, then there's still a bias. The only difference is that you don't know what the bias is. So it's always best to always be cautious and aware publicly, if we can, for our own biases.
So I'm Mark Vopat, as you said. I'm a professor of philosophy in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies. I'm also the director of the Dr. James Dale Ethics Center here at YSU. The purpose of the center is to promote the teaching of ethics across the curriculum. I actually started out my academic career as an electrical engineering major, and then changed to philosophy, much to the chagrin of my parents, and then went into philosophy. That led to ethics and social and political philosophy, making it my sort of area of expertise. And so I work in that with children's rights, but more recently have been working with engineering ethics and across all engineering disciplines. So that's been my focus here on campus, is applied ethics, that along with business ethics. As far as the artificial intelligence, there's a lot of parallels between that and the work I do in children's rights, looking at AI almost as a child in the way it's beginning, and how is it that we actually learn about morality, how do we sort of process moral statements. And so what I'm seeing with AI are a lot of parallels with this sort of this new technology, but also the fact that we're starting with a blank slate, and exactly how do we sort of morally train these new machines. And so my interest lies in that area as to how we can incorporate not just code, which I love gadgets, I love technology, but I also see them as being awfully morally neutral. And so I think that's going to be problematic as we get to autonomous vehicles and autonomous machines and sophisticated AI.
Fantastic, and we share that interest too, because my blog and my work, people always think it's about technology and artificial intelligence, but actually it's about ethics, because technology is just a context. Technology is amoral until you apply it, and then it becomes either moral or immoral, and that's depending on us. We make those choices, for now at least, until they become autonomous agents. So we do share that interest too. Oh, you're next.
Yes, I'm Paul Carlson, a local. I went to high school and graduated from Youngstown State with a undergraduate degree in political science and a master's degree in history, and probably my favorite instructor was James Dale. He was an excellent instructor. He'd have, at the graduate level, I remember him having class at his apartment. So I started out actually at the Naval Academy, though, in engineering. And I'm probably on this panel the most novice in the area of artificial intelligence. So every time I'm with Dr. J, I learn more and more of the specifics and the technical aspects of what AI is. Thanks to Don Hanai III, I landed in a fantastic job in Columbus for Mary Ellen Withrow, so I've got a lot of political contacts. I was very close with Senator Michelle, and I had a fantastic opportunity because I was high enough at the government level to be actually I was the technology advisor to the previous mayor, Michael Cole.
Robots are a permanent part of our everyday life. Homes, hospitals, airports, everyday places. And more specifically, I work on research about human-robot interaction, reasoning, planning. By reasoning, I mean you give the robot some knowledge, the robot needs to draw conclusions. By planning, you give the robot a task, how the robot can decompose it into sequence of actions, do all of this research.
Fantastic. So we're up for a very interesting discussion. Artificial intelligence, and why would anyone care about it?
So I would like to categorize the class of artificial intelligence implementations based on some characteristics, not behavioral, but characteristics of these algorithms. Firstly, these algorithms achieve certain objectives in a more dynamic way than traditional computer programming. And the intent of it is typically to take observations of the real world, somehow presented to these agents, and classify them based on rules. And the reason why I describe this characterization is that typical agents function within a belief system. And this belief system is programmed either into the rules or the way they interpret data or the way they plan to reach.
I'd like to elaborate because the area that I'm interested in from a smart cities and intelligent community perspective is computational sustainability. I think it was Cornell that started an institute back in 2010. So a lot of the work that Jay and Doug and Doug is part of the Global Institute for the Study of Intelligent Communities, an institute that Dublin, Ohio. There's only 2 of those institutes in the U.S., and Dublin is taking a tremendous leadership in that initiative. So for me, AI is about computational sustainability, where the framework is all built around human well-being and a framework around sustainability. If we have time, maybe we could get into that a little bit more later.
Anybody else?
So I'll add, I guess, perspective here, which is I think of AI as a class of algorithms specifically, or specifically things that can process information. What makes them unique from any other algorithm is that they learn over time. So with more data points, with more information, they adjust how they compute, and that leads to different outcomes. Maybe tag on the idea of agency as you move from the machine learning side of the spectrum to the AI side of the spectrum. But I think it's the ability to learn or get better at a specific task through learning that characterizes artificial intelligence.
I think you can already see that there's different flavors, to say the least, between how different people perceive what artificial intelligence is and what are the important things. And so when you watch sometimes the disagreement between different experts on artificial intelligence about whatever it may be the case, think how much of that may be actually derived because people are talking about slightly or considerably different things. And quite often they're simply talking past each other, which will not be the case here tonight. But just for the record, I wanted to share the original meeting that at the original conference in 1956 was given back by Dr. John McCarthy, who said that artificial intelligence, for him, or he defined it as the science and engineering of making intelligent machines. Full stop. So, the better and the more important question is, why should we care about it, right? We defined it. Why should we care? What are the implications? In other words, what are the major fields and areas that we should be concerned and focusing about, in your opinion? Because our hosts today have supplanted me with 5 pages of fantastic questions here, and they cover all kinds of issues from artificial intelligence to smart cities to self-driving cars and so on. But I want to hear what, in your view, are the most important areas that we should be looking at, and why? Because why should anyone here in the audience care about what you guys, the experts, have in the kitchen for us tonight? Jay?
I'd like to get back to why I defined artificial intelligence from a more implementation-oriented perspective of having a belief system, because therein lies a lot of societal issues. So, in order to surface those societal issues, I'd like to characterize artificial intelligence of an agent and a belief system of that agent and contrast it with how we function from a societal perspective. We have many different belief systems and many different ways of interacting between these belief systems. If our focus is purely on automation of a particular agent, it can very quickly go into a bubble that is inconsistent with what we expect it to do. So for example, many data mining techniques, they work fine on routine data, but the minute you have non-routine data, data that falls outside of the mean, you end up with malfunction in your agents because the belief system is not sophisticated enough to adjust for it. So the reason why I bring up social intelligence is even going back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago about the good, Chris's example of good, bad, and other agents. We had better results when we pulled our collective belief systems in and mashed them up together to come up with better conclusions. And this is somewhat of a
One, it's extraordinarily powerful. And I don't think our human minds are used to considering the scale of capability that we're dealing with here. This is something you can turn on and leave on, and it's just Another point is it scales. And many of the technologies and the things that we've dealt with as a human species up to now don't scale like that. It can scale exponentially forever. Obviously not forever, there are limitations, but it scales. It's powerful. It picks up our own biases, and it can do things that I think we haven't considered all the implications of. So I think one of the reasons why we have to think about it can do things that we think about a machine, at least my image of a machine, I see gears and wheels and pulleys and stuff like that. And you think of something mechanical. But when we say machine, an algorithm it can be a few characters of code. And we don't think of that as a machine. But if you turn something on and you say, identify all the people and their political beliefs or their history or certain information about them, there's a lot of danger. Just as with nuclear power, it can power all sorts of things, or it can destroy all sorts of things. So we need to give some serious thought as a society, both about how we're going to use nuclear power and also how we're going to use this extraordinarily powerful resource that we've created.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, ethicists you tell us, why should we care also about AI too?
Well, I think in part because it's not, I want to be careful because when we talk about a belief system, viewing AI as having a belief system, that's sort of odd from a philosopher's perspective to call it a belief system. But I think there's two sorts of questions. Like to take an example, maybe make it easier. Facebook results. And when you look at the Facebook ads that you get on a Facebook page, or which posts you get to see, is a product of artificial intelligence. Now, if you want to say that the artificial intelligence has a belief system, I think that really it's more of a question of better versus better for. So the outcome of the Facebook search, you might go on, so they've shown, for example, that Facebook will show, when you see those job offers sometimes on the sidebar for different individuals, they'll show that the job offers for women are far less in terms of pay than the job offers they show for men. That's one way in which the artificial intelligence is catering based on what people are clicking on and what it associates with women's jobs versus men's jobs. It also, in your feed, Facebook wants you to stay on the page. It wants you to be comfortable. And so the algorithm that Facebook generates is one that says something like, I want to show you things that are going to keep you coming back. So when, for example, there was the uprising in Egypt, if you looked at the results on a lot of pages, you weren't getting the same results there on your Facebook page, the news updates and people, if you weren't the type of person that clicked on a lot of those links, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't want you to go too far. You said that you thought it was odd to refer to AI having a belief system. Right? Can you just expound on that just a little bit before we go too far?
I think it's because in part this goes back to the question of what is AI. There's soft AI and hard AI, right? So if we're talking about the AI in terms of can a machine give me an intelligent answer to a question, that's not the same as a machine that's actually self-aware, that holds a system of beliefs and is aware that they're holding those beliefs and saying, oh, I want to impose those beliefs. And so when I think of belief, I think of in terms of something, an agent that actually understands that it believes something, as opposed to that it spits out a result that we could sort of put onto that output. Oh, the machine must think that. And I'm not sure what the ontology of the machine or the metaphysics of the machine is yet, right? I don't know if I want to attribute to a machine a belief system in the sense that now in an algorithm, if you want to use the terms in sort of an interchangeable way, that's something different. But so belief for me means that, that this is like the Facebook algorithm saying, look, I believe Mark wants to see pictures of kittens. And he doesn't want to see all that disturbing stuff about what's going on in the Middle East, for example. I don't think that's the case. I think someone at Facebook said, we want to make sure that whatever Mark likes to look at, don't show him too much about the Middle East, because he's going to turn Facebook off. And I don't want him to turn Facebook off. So it doesn't matter whether it's good for Mark to know about what's going on in the Middle East. Maybe it's good for Mark to see disturbing images of Charlottesville, or because that's important it's good for Mark to see that, but it's not good for Facebook if Mark sees those images. So it seems to me that why this is important is because when you do a Google search, just sitting right here, if all of you did a Google search for the same topic, you're going to find that your results are different than the person next to you. Why is that? Old Facebook or old Google, it was the same. Old Google, the same terms almost always came up exactly the same. Now it knows what machine you're on, it knows what your IP, it knows a lot about you and says, no, no, we're going to tailor things towards you. Well, that's the bubble idea, right? Now you're only getting the information that you really like when maybe I want the information I don't like. Maybe that's what's important.
I'd like to clarify the definition of belief system. I mean, implicitly or explicitly, these algorithms embody beliefs. It could be as simple as I'm only going to support what he clicks, he likes, so I'm going to use that type to drive my algorithms. But whether this is a thin belief system or a deep belief system, most of the algorithms embody this that leads us into the bubbles that you're talking about.
A couple ideas I'd like to maybe share is complexity theory, wicked problems. You can't say the universe or humanity, 7 billion people, we are such a complex cosmos addressing. We can't solve wicked problems. We can address them and try to take steps to alleviate them. So working with Pat Kerrigan here at a makerspace in Youngstown, how do we actually do something with AI from a tactical, practical perspective? We like to think of AI also as a crowdsourcing, that humans, it's the human in the loop aspect. So when Jay talks about a belief system based upon little ontology around sustainability and human well-being, it's not like AI has a belief system, but by the product or the platform or the...
It can enable different belief systems. So going back to Facebook, it's a great example. What Facebook does is it makes connections based on very superficial, I mean, I don't want to say superficial.
I would say superficial. No, that's perfectly good.
It makes connections based on friend of a friend ontology. However, for regional improvement, since smart cities and intelligent communities is one of the underlying themes, for regional improvement, what we want to do is make connections so that humans can come together as in the agora of the past and create new knowledge that they can collectively share. So it's facilitating knowledge creation, but the initiative of coming into this environment to have the discourse for knowledge creation comes from the crowd, which is the local population.
So the Journal of AI Research, that an article that Jay, Doug, Chris, and myself are working on right now, and the working title of the paper is AI for Purpose. So it's not technical, right? We're not going to go into the sensor data although part of what we put in the paper, at least the draft that we're working on right now, guess what asset of a city may have more value than any other asset the city has? Anybody want to throw out maybe what asset of the city? What'd you say?
Archive, the data.
No, but that's a good response. This is more of an infrastructure item. You're smart, integrated with sensors, your light post, the cameras, the sensors. If there's a smart bomb or so a city's light integrated LED, and the beauty of LED light system from a public policy perspective, it funds itself. So Youngstown can roll out, save what, 50, 60, 70% of its electric utility bills, put sensors and cameras. And MIT physicists said that we've got 200 to 300 more years to go where the accelerations will continue. So just think of what you're going to be exposed to and the potential of technology in 5, 10, 15 years from now.
Can I bring you over to this other point here, though? You used the word purpose, and we've talked about a couple other things. What is the good? It's kind of my question. And I was moved by this Flappy Birds thing here, because this is a machine, and you didn't give it the rules. And that's the interesting thing to me. the game stopped, and it said, oh, well, let me try again. And then it tried to get through this thing. So, well, when I get through this thing, it keeps going. And it somehow determined that that was good. And that's interesting, because sometimes we stop. You know, humans don't have that same kind of motivation. And so kind of my question is, how are these machines, this artificial intelligence, going to determine what is good? Not necessarily what we wanted, because as you said, you can't if then else this. This was not coded. So that's the difference to me between an algorithm, which you can spell. It might take you a long time, but you can program something to do something. But when something listens to us and then determines that if I were to catch a terrorist, it would be good, and I was rewarded for that, I'm going to catch another terrorist, or I'm going to do, what is a terrorist? Did we ever define it? We're going to stop human trafficking, or we're going to deal with the opioid crisis, or we're going to deal with some of these significant deep problems that we have these emotional responses to, and we talk a lot about. Our machines are going to pick that up and say that's the good. And that's kind of my question as to, from a basic human level, how are we going to be responsible for how our machines pick up what we think is good? Or are they going to make up their own minds about it?
Maybe Dr. Zhang can help us out with that, and then Andrew.
So, I mean, I have like a few years working on AI research. I mostly just focus on my algorithms, not looking out to the whole civic community, society. So, from my view, AI is a term that keeps growing. I mean, originally, AI researchers, we only talk about AI on knowledge representation, when we give some knowledge how we represent it, using rules, using probabilities, and reasoning, drawing conclusions, planning, like create a sequence of actions, all of these. But nowadays, people use AI to refer to many things. I'm thinking that we are given this term more and more challenging tasks. It requires a lot of interaction with other areas. I don't know, psychology, people, neuroscience, yeah, many things. So from my view, I'm a researcher, so I'm trying to go back to the original definition and focusing on these challenges. I mean, it's good that AI has more and more meanings and people use this. People know more and more about AI. It's everywhere, so it's good. But it's again, I hope that we can give a good boundary, especially the new generation. We want to let them know that this is the capabilities of AI. But if you want to go beyond that, you may need to learn some more. Technologies.
Chess stopped being artificial intelligence. Then it became Jeopardy. We did that. Then it became AlphaGo, we did that, and so by virtue of that, the definition seems to be expanding constantly because we're always chasing after it.
I'll say it's important because any of you who want to have a living and have a job, being aware of what jobs are likely to be replaced and what jobs are likely to be created is, at this point in your life, dramatically increases the probability that you'll have a job that you like on down the road. Looking a little bit farther into the future, beyond just maybe the next few years, is that I think AI will basically put us in a bifurcation point as a species. So as he said, AI can scale in ways that we can't really comprehend, is capable of things we really can't comprehend, and it's essentially a force multiplier, well, first on our goals, but potentially eventually on its own goals. And so I think that means that the direction that humanity goes from one place where it can be utopia, where the creation of excess value that's enabled by automation can be spread throughout us all, so we can all basically do what we want with time on one side of the spectrum, and on the other, forget taking over the world, but where AI can simply allow those who build it and own it to amass a large concentration of wealth where all that excess value is kind of in piles and not floating around the economy. So I think just from a financial standpoint, it's going to be impacted in ways already is that are hard for us to wrap our head around. One other thing to address is this idea of beliefs. So I'll put a big asterisk next to this to say, not a philosopher. So I'll probably use a whole bunch of words that mean precise things, and I'll use them imprecisely. But when I think about artificial intelligence or artificial agents, largely, there's an important question to ask, which is, are they different from humans? And much of my work in physics originally started doing simulations, so just take an atom, simulate how it works, make it 2 atoms or 500,000. And so there's an argument to be made that we are in no way distinguished from a computer program, that if you can represent me as one, then maybe we should be thinking about AIs in the exact same way that we think about ourselves, as far as how we ascribe morality to it or belief to it. And I'll save the conversation of consciousness maybe for a different part of this discussion, because that's usually where that will lead us. But to say that I think taking the mechanisms that we use to consider our own morality and the frameworks that we use to consider what we think as good and bad, in so much as those are evaluating our actions, I think is incredibly useful to AI, because if we have a super powerful thing, we certainly want to define what good means, which I won't, because that's a really hard problem in itself. But then once we've defined it, we want to understand how we achieve it. And so there's a combination
Let me, Andrew, jump on you now,
Yeah.
and I want to take exception with some things. And Mark kind of started it, and you should finish that and not let them off the hook with this thing on the beliefs, okay? Because it's a big part of it. First of all, Dr. J, you threw out the notion that algorithms, a collection of algorithms represent beliefs. Algorithms are a set of instructions, okay? Instructions are not tantamount to beliefs. Maybe if you add the instructions plus the data, plus the runtime, you might try to get to something, but algorithms themselves are not sufficient for beliefs. We're having this same argument right now at the SIG AI on what the actual definition of an algorithm is. That seems to be slipping away through our fingers. So,
Could you prove that you aren't a set of instructions being executed?
yeah, hold on. Let me make this point. I would suggest that beliefs, there's something to do with experience in there. There's something to do with truth in there, okay? You have to kind of approach that element, experience and truth, and it's more than just instructions. And so in a forum like this, we do not want to equivocate on such important terminology. And if we're going to say that agents have belief systems, we need to really nail down what we mean.
Can I ask a question?
Let me clarify, since he's asking me to be precise.
Yes.
What I mean is that every program we write, if we give it the power to act on our behalf, as you introduced, it embodies some belief. Okay, whether it's what we would call
I think I
a
understand
human.
where Dr. J is coming, and I would like to actually go to her side for a moment
Yes.
here, because
But let me finish. And the reason I do agree, this is an extremely important core principle to discuss, because what I was going to say is, if in our mind's eye we go back thousands of years and we look at how society evolved, we found that over time the chances of survival were better if there wasn't a single human belief system embodied in a human body that acted on behalf of the family network. It would be better if we had multiple types of belief systems interacting. Now, if we now begin to take some of these belief systems and put it in computer, if we computerize it in some way, we lose a lot of the communication ability and the contextual ability to act contextually with these automated agents, because their ability to evolve, to change their belief, to adapt to the context is very limited. And therein lies a big threat. And therefore, I think before we automate too readily human activity, we should first have broader discussions about what social intelligence is. Because, as I said earlier, our collective intelligence here came to different answers than it would be if we took one of these individuals and in effect, that's what we do with isolated programs, put them in a little box and say, okay, you are free to act on your own. But that's going to, and the problem with artificial intelligence due to the scalability is bad beliefs can also accelerate bad things in the real world really, really fast.
Maybe to what you're saying and to that as he asked his question, Matt?
Yes.
I think one of the things we're attempting to do is use our descriptions of human concepts on an artificial intelligence. And we're just going to run right into that. And so we're going to using the words beliefs, I would submit you using the word like truth or words like feelings or, you know what I mean? We don't have the language to describe this. So and we should put a great big old asterisk on this and say...
Then we ought to not use the word belief.
Yes, but the thing is that without a word, it's a human thing to use kind of symbology to represent an idea. And we just don't have that idea. We got like a 2-hour...
I just want to reiterate this here. Algorithms may be necessary for belief, but they are not sufficient, right? Algorithms
Depends
alone.
on how you define belief, right? We can have rudimentary beliefs embodied. Facebook strategy actually embodies a rudimentary belief that the only thing that is important is this friend-of-friend network, and I can push everything down those relationships and make all these decisions about what ads to show you, right?
That's an assumption, not
That's
necessarily a belief.
But if you replace the word
No, I would say it's a rudimentary belief embodied in that, and the point I'm making is that in agents, we neuter them in some ways.
That's what
and
it is.
something
The
in
algorithms
there.
themselves have goals.
I would
There's
say
an
bias.
intention.
They have a bias.
They have a bias, but they have an intention, right? When you
Intention,
write, when you
yes.
write, there's a programmer that intentionally creates an
Yes.
algorithm
Yes.
to achieve a certain goal. Now, it might not be I want a specific number output, but there is a goal to the algorithm. What it's supposed to do. The intentional part, the belief part, comes in from what the programmer is attempting to create. Now, the algorithm might do all kinds of crazy things once it's out there, but it's a goal. And I think this goes back to your comment about, you know, what is the good?
Right.
And part of what I would be concerned about, almost less than what you call that, is the Flappy Bird example is nice. Flappy Bird is constrained. There's certain constraints on the actions of the machine, right? So it can't go through the poles or the tubes. It has to go in between. Now, what if you've got AI that you tell it it's got a perfectly legitimate, intentional goal? I want world peace. And what if I find that I could have through world peace? All I'd have to do is get rid of 1 billion people. Because that's what will get world peace. So in the Flappy Bird game, it's great. It goes through 20 iterations. It figures out, I can't go through the poles. What if it wasn't constrained? What if it said, no. You know, it's a lot easier than trying to bounce around between all those damn poles, which when I played that game drove me nuts. What if I just blast right through them? Destroy the poles. Then I solved the problem, right?
Exactly.
Well, what's to constrain the AI from saying, look, I've got a perfectly valid, legitimate goal that is not culturally relative. We all want peace. Peace is across the board, something that different cultures want. I can do it by just blasting through the poles. And if that means blasting through people or buildings or regimes, I can do that. And look, I've made peace. And I look at that and go, whoa, wait a minute. And we don't even have to disagree on the goal. The goal is a good. We already agree on the good. We're just disagreeing on the means, but the machine doesn't understand that, yes, even though this may be a lot more suffering, I can't do that. And the question is, why can't I?
This is an important question I have. How did the machine figure out that not going through the pole was bad?
Well, see,
there were no instructions. And I think I know the answer is that.
That's the belief system embodied by the programmer.
It is. But if it had not been given any initial instructions, why not hit the pole, game stops, and then it starts again. How does it know not to just hit the pole?
So again, all of these examples, I was going to comment on reinforcement, but maybe you'll jump in.
So the algorithm behind the behaviors is called deep learning integrated with reinforcement learning. So basically the agent is trying to maximize either the score or the duration that the agent is alive. So after all of these, the agent is trying to still do kind of maximization.
Exactly.
Following the algorithm.
Which we find, yeah.
Which
And
we
that's
define.
what the belief system being captured in there. It may be very rudimentary, but it's there.
So let me exercise my moderator powers here for a second and try and reshift and refocus our. It's a tool which helps you solve a problem. It helps you achieve a goal, maximize score, for example, extend duration. It doesn't tell you whether that's a worthy goal. It doesn't tell you where you should focus. The direction of the goal, the worthiness, and the whole motivation behind why you should start to apply that tool or science in the first place comes outside of it. So that's one of the limitations of a science. Science, first of all, is unable to set its own priorities. Priorities come from outside, which is why usually science needs to make an alignment with ideology, with a business goal, with a political goal, etc. And then the other failure of science is after it's produced the result, it's unable to figure out on its own what's the best application of the result. And then we have, the commercialization or the politicization or all the other places which take that result and figure out the best way for their own purposes and agenda to apply the science for it. But I prefer to call that biases, and the reason was not only Marvin Minsky, who was famous about those, but just to give you a very interesting child psychology example of how preload the outcomes quite often without being aware. So turns out when we have kids, we think that boys and girls are different, and we say that they do that by nature. But we are very much unaware to what incredible degree we have input unconsciously, subconsciously from the very moment they're born. So here's an example that blew my mind. When a baby is born, and it's like a day or two, one of the first things that we do, and one of the first things that babies do, is they grab something. And usually it's like a finger, right? The first thing is like the baby doesn't see very well, doesn't hear very well, but it can squeeze a finger, and we're amazed how strong they are, right? So here's how we preload the system for the outcome. If it's a boy, most of us subconsciously pull, and then we say, oh, he's very strong, right? If it's a girl, we don't pull, we stay there. And then based on that feedback that comes from outside, not from inside, babies start subconsciously learning what's right and what's wrong, what's expected of them, even before they're aware of what it does. Before being aware of what is being a girl, what is being a boy. And that happens hours and days after they're born. So I would like to say that what Dr. J is saying in a way for me is that we may create those algorithms, but they always come with something preloaded, a belief system. It's very subtle and it's very hidden and it's very deep, and we may not even be aware of it, but it's there. And that's why Dr. Minsky used to say that if you don't know where it is, you just don't know where it is, but it is there.
But there's, let me just, again, as a caveat on my part, I'm in the area that I want to call computational epistemology, right? And so what I'm interested in are classic philosophical structures and ways of defining discrete structures that mirror or map to those epistemic structures. So something like belief for me is it has a meaning that I can put my finger on. And so you guys talked quickly here. Someone mentioned intentions, right? Someone mentioned beliefs, right? So with rational agents, there is a BDI model, right? Beliefs, desires, someone brought up goals, right? And intentions. So those three things are different things. Goals are different than beliefs. Beliefs are different than intentions. And all of that is different than algorithms. Okay, so if we have computer science and engineering students here, we've got to be clear on what we mean by algorithm and differentiate that from what we mean by a heuristic. You know, we have to differentiate process internationally because of the predictive policing. We are arguing about the notion of transparent algorithms and being able to look into those algorithms. And we can't get to the argument of transparent algorithms until we can agree what is an algorithm and what is not an algorithm. And right now we're kind of losing sight of that thing, and we just did here. We just equivocated between goal, intention, belief, and algorithm. Those are not the same things. And at least the technical folks here who are charged with turning this conversation into something that executes on a computer, we have to be more or less precise, right?
I have to say, though, that, and that's a point very well taken, there's another argument going on elsewhere, and it's in the street and it's in the city council chambers. And one of my concerns is, as that international argument between scientists gets the terms right, and I'm not defending the concept of a belief system, but it'll work in council chambers. Because there's this conversation that we have computer scientists, computer science students in the room, but there's another conversation between people who can't spell heuristics, don't care what an algorithm is, they want to know whether this thing can take over, and is that bad? And it might be a good thing for us to use plainer language to say, you know, some of our beliefs are being programmed into our machines, and we need to have a conversation about that. And then, so it's going to derail one conversation, but could get another.
In the last few years, the latest definition of organism is a biological algorithm.
Yes, yes.
So you have here a bunch of biological algorithms walking, and each of us has our own belief system.
But that's a school of thought. You know, there are people there's groups that will take stimulus and response, and they will say there's no such thing as intelligence, right? It's all just a bunch of actions and reactions and behavior, and stimulus and response, and there are no structures that truly represent something that like belief. And so when you are talking about it strictly from the biological point of view, just keep in mind that represents a school of thought for AI, and there's another school of thought that doesn't see it that way.
Of course, yeah. I'm actually working on a book right now about the importance of story and how each science actually is going on telling a different kind of story. Yeah. So when I interview computer scientists, they think they've got, you know, they're at the center of the world because the future is artificial intelligence and the singularity. When I interview a mathematician, he would tell me, well, you know, everything comes from mathematics. Mathematics is a universal language. When I talk to Michio Kaku, he would tell me, no, it's physics. Actually, it's physics.
Exactly.
When I talk to a linguist, they'll tell me it's linguistics because everything happens in language. When I talk to a neuroscientist, he tells me, no, it's neuroscience because you see, you need the brain to think about this, and if you change the brain, you change everything. So everyone thinks they've got, you know, God's private phone line or something, right? But that's all a story within which we create models, and then they start fitting within that story. But those are all just a diversity of stories. So not the story is about talking good or bad. Is artificial intelligence good or bad? So Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg had a kind of public disagreement recently about that. And on the side of Elon Musk, we have names such as Dr. Stephen Hawking, Bill Gates, Steve Wozniak, and a bunch of other luminaries who have warned us about artificial intelligence. So I want to restart the conversation with, is it good or bad?
I think it's potentially an ill-formed question to ascribe good or badness to a thing like an algorithm. I would say the important question is, can it achieve good and or bad outcomes? And so my understanding of the disagreement between the people you named is that Elon Musk would argue that it can achieve both very good or very bad outcomes. Thus, we should put a lot of energy into ensuring that very bad outcomes don't happen. Whereas other people argue that those extremely bad outcomes are simply impossible. So, and I would, I guess, put my hat in that ring to say that certainly I can see paths to very good or very bad outcomes. Thus, I think it's important that we talk about what the good outcomes are that we want, but more importantly, that we understand how the bad outcomes can happen in ways that are not obvious. So certainly there's obvious ways bad outcomes happen. For example, if Facebook's algorithm that's optimizing for keeping eyeballs on the page may sway our opinions or make us addicted to the internet, then that's a bad outcome that we can understand. But there's potential other ones that are well beyond the scope of our understanding that we can't predict until we get there. And so I would say that it's neither good nor bad, and it can achieve good and bad things, and that we don't even know yet what those things could be.
Just to be more specific about the conversation between Elon and Musk, basically Mark called Elon's comments about artificial intelligence, quote, unhelpful, to which Elon responded via Twitter that Mark's understanding of artificial intelligence was limited. So tonight we're very lucky we have unlimited understanding of artificial intelligence. So is it good or bad?
I'd like to address it from a little slightly different angle. I like the terminology being a mindful optimist. Mindful optimist. That's about, I think, the best you can go when you think about the good or the bad, because it really can go either direction, and it's up to panel discussions like this that broadcast the topic so that it's not all the fearful. I think robots in themselves have gotten such a bad rap, right? Because you see the robot with the red eyes killing people all the time. So the science fiction stories are usually...
But into that AI is what's going to ultimately decide. So you can create an AI with a great goal in mind. I mean, I'm thinking now of the recent studies about the numbers assigned to criminal defendants, and whether or not they should get parole, or whether or not they should go home. And because that data is being scraped from biased sources, it's really a representation or a reflection of how we've treated people in the past. And so this goes to the history argument. If the data that the machine gets is not aspirational, but is more based on what's already come in the past, if that's the only way we can seem to get the machines to learn, then it's really going to be a reflection of ourselves, right? That's what we're going to get out of the AI, whether it's biased, whether it's got good information coming in. So my concern is more with what's going in to the AI. So the AI, I think, itself is not good or bad. It's going to be a reflection of what we're doing.
So what does it say about us when a chatbot released by Microsoft becomes a xenophobic white supremacist in a day?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you an example. I read the Akron Beacon
Male chauvinist.
The Akron Beacon Journal published recently a question of race and on white privilege. And it asked for people's opinion from the community. Now, after reading that newspaper, if that was what was fed into an AI machine to see what are the attitudes about people, it was scary what people were willing to admit. But if the machine is simply taking and transforming words into numbers and comparing those relative to other words, there were a lot that had to do with minority, welfare, taking from me, unfair, immigrant, get out. I mean, these associations, which naturally I could see a computer bringing together, would paint a really bad picture of certain groups based on this was blatant, the racism and the things that you were reading in these little comments that people had voluntarily with their name on sent in. So I think what we're going to see is that AI, unless there's some way of treating those algorithms in a way that are able to understand bias or to be able to filter out some of that, I think you're going to get a reflection of us, which might not be very pretty, is what I'm thinking.
So I'm thinking that we can never blame technology. I mean, artificial intelligence, after all, is a kind of technology. Technology is never wrong. If something goes wrong, it's actually you or me or any of us not properly using it. So talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, so I use my phone. This guide me here from Cleveland, so I can use my
Let me give you a hypothetical. Forgive me for the interruption, but artificial intelligence is never wrong, and you're into machine learning.
Mm-hmm.
So you create artificial intelligence, which I have no doubt you will, and it happens so that the artificial intelligence says that the best outcome that I've come up with is to exterminate the humankind. It's the best for the planet, it's the best for everyone else. It can never be wrong according to your ideas. Do you submit or do you resist?
mean, technology is there, but we can use it in the wrong way.
But it's already gone to the point where, you know, it's learned what it had to learn, and
That's why we need regulations. We need regulations on the technology, how you should use it. If you use it that way, you need,
but it's like one of
The
those.
question is, how does it use itself?
Exactly.
We're no longer using it
Right.
once we turn it on.
When I talked to Dr. Ferrucci, who was the team leader behind Watson, he told me, I have no idea why Watson got this answer right and this one wrong, and I don't even know how it got to that answer. We just fed it Wikipedia and a bunch of other things, and then it learned on its own. So in other words, I don't think you would have the control to predict what the outcome would be, or to guarantee it at the very least.
So when we talk about AI, there are really very few of AI are really fully autonomous. So most of these share some kind of autonomy with human, with other machines. So there's always a way human can get involved and say stop. So when something goes wrong, I don't know, I read the news yesterday, people developed an AI that can use pictures to identify if humans are like
Gay or straight.
right, sexual orientation.
And
So
the researcher said the
that's
next
an
thing is to
example
measure
of
people's IQ, by the way, from their face. And political orientation, by the way. So sexual orientation, political orientation, IQ, all of those things just from your face.
they can achieve like 70% accuracy. I don't know how they did that, but I think it's in a direction that's not helping us improve our life. It's in a direction that somebody
It's a
should
matter of
stand
opinion.
out.
If you are a male chauvinist, white supremacist, that's improving our life.
That's a perfect tool for you, actually.
Right. I mean, you know, that's a human who's made a value judgment about what
artificial intelligence outside of the context of social intelligence is very risky. And social intelligence is something we are not studying enough.
Do we even possess it, I wonder?
Let me say it this way. With my doctoral students, I've studied large expert networks, the kinds that support help desks. So these are networks of about 900 people, and we look at the help desk tickets coming in and how they get routed through the system. And we find that in general, when a ticket comes in, if it doesn't get resolved right away, it just trashes all over the network.
only about.
But if you look at the ticket content, the content of the problem, in effect, you can classify them as routine problems and non-routine problems. Automation of routine problems is okay, because it's not debatable. They are typically assisting humans. But automation of non-routine problems is extremely risky because, for one thing, the recommendation algorithms sway all over the place and then they go into a bubble. And they make wrong recommendations and it goes worse and worse and worse, and you don't have enough data sets. But artificial intelligence can recommend that humans get in the loop of certain decision making. And so in those cases, if humans are involved, you're basically using social intelligence and injecting it into the automation processes, from external into the automation black box. And that could work. So, but looking at pure automation out of the context of human social intelligence, whatever you want to call it, is very risky.
Can I throw something in there, just controversy, because I'm having a ball, and let's mix it up. You know, it's interesting. I think that the artificial intelligence can inform us for some of this social intelligence. And I think our brains, we tend to think like we know what we're talking about. And we universally agree, for example, that racism is bad. And on the facial recognition kind of thing, we universally agree that eugenics is bad. So we think that we're telling our machines a certain thing, certain value.
I believe the geneticist community recently, There's not
So speculate, absolutely. But I'm just saying on a societal kind of, we're talking about social intelligence. So, but consider for a moment that, racism comes from evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology, and if you were to say that this is bad, a lot of what has kept us alive has come from our fears and from things that if we tried to eliminate or agreed that they were bad, it would be very interesting to see what an AI looks at us as a social being, not just that. And I think trying to inject social intelligence when we don't have it ourselves, we don't understand racism. We don't understand our genetic biases and those kinds of things.
Or speciesism, I would like to call, because
Absolutely.
absolute no issue that arises here. They would be a different kind from us.
Correct.
And the only difference would be the lack of biology thereof. If they're robotic or if they're software-based, they would not be biological like us. And then, instead of racism and human rights, we might be talking about intelligence rights and speciesism or biologism.
We might, but we're not there yet. And it's interesting, we think that we're our machines' gods, and we're going to teach them, and we know, and we can control them. And I think that's a level of hubris that we should begin to come to terms with now, because I do think that artificial intelligence is good, but we are at a point of exponential growth ourselves, and we need to embrace what we need to do as a species as well.
But let me turn the mirror here back exactly what you're saying and push it even further, because it's not about us and machines, it's about us and the rest of our world.
Exactly.
So we are gods effectively right now on our planet. We decide who is to live and to die.
Yeah.
Right? So every year we kill about 75 billion animals on our planet for sports, for fun, and for food, and 1.3 trillion fish or other sea and ocean organisms. That's fish, that could be mussels, that could be shrimp, that could be whatever of that sort. So 75 billion animals annually and 1.3 trillion fish. So, and the only justification we have for that is that we're smarter than you, therefore we can eat you and kill you and enslave you and do all of that. That's really what it comes down. Science told us, I mean, before that it was religion who told us, you know, the world is our garden and we were in the image of God. Then we had humanism that basically said God is dead and it's no longer God who is in the center of the world, but it is us, humans, who are the most important thing. We're the pinnacle of evolution. Therefore, we can do everything we want to do with the rest of our planet. And the whole justification stems from there. And what happens to us if the artificial intelligence takes on the exact same reasoning and says, I'm smarter than you, therefore I can decide extermination of your kind is the best. Or I can do whatever I want with you for experiments, like we do with animals, for consumption, like in the Matrix we were a battery, for example, or for sports, just for fun, like we go hunting or trophy hunting or whatever. And what the mirror image, and you guys all brought that point, that we're scared to teach them what our history was, because we're scared they would do what we have done. And yet we're not thinking about changing ourselves, we're thinking about how they shouldn't be like us.
But I think Doug is also pointing out that perhaps we can use artificial intelligence to inform humans of what they look like. For example,
You need just to turn
data
on the
mining
TV
and
to see
we
what they
find
look like.
sexism or racism and so on and so forth. But we'll also find that our values, we in the West tend to use our value system as a way to judge almost every other population out there. And even exposing that would be extremely useful for a more functional United Nations. So we can use AI as a reflection of what we look like, because as isolated pockets of intellectuals discussing this, we can't fully comprehend how bad this is, for example.
So I think your point is, as long as we can unplug the machine,
No,
it's okay, right? I mean, on this account, what you're saying is, look, this could really reflect on what we're like, and we could have AI that points out. What we really don't want is an artificial intelligence that could actually interact in the world other than providing information, right? Right, it's two different things, right? So on the one hand, you could have AI that spits back to me an image of the world or tells me where I'm doing things that are bad. The next step is what means do we allow it to change or interact with that world? And that's where maybe the robots are the question of exactly how much AI do we want, or how much autonomy do we want on our AI in machines that interact with us outside of the computer screen or whatever it is
Right, for an AI to say elimination of humanity would be a good idea because you guys suck, that would be okay. For an AI to say, and I have all these guns, that would be not okay.
No, but we are already giving them guns, right? I did my thesis in 2007 in political science
Perhaps a
on
bad
drone
idea.
warfare. On drone warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan. At the time, only the United States had drones, and only about a dozen of them were armed, and they were only operated by the CIA. Today, we have 80 countries currently either having working prototypes of armed drones or working on them. And most of those are already automated, fully automated. So yeah, for example, in the United States here by law, we have a human in the loop. But that's only a legal thing. We actually have the capability. So the drone taxis on the runway on its own, takes off on its own, goes to the designated coordinates on its own, loiters until they can identify the target on its own, can even go and refuel in the air on its own, can come back home to base, land entirely on its own. At any moment in time, a human can override and take manual control, but that's not necessary. That's only, so it is. And the only place the human comes into play right now is actually to bomb or not to bomb. That's the question, right? And it's usually a high school dropout who kind of is flying the machine because they spend a certain time of qualifying hours playing video games and makes them very dexterous and very fast and efficient and effective operating those drones, which effectively put out of business the most, because that's what pilots call them, by the way, because pilots are the most expensive and highly trained soldiers in any military across the world. And they've had years of training, and then here comes this kid from high school, or maybe didn't even finish high school, but is very good at video games, and now that kid ends up having more bombing missions than this pilot, right?
Yeah, so Nick, I'm not so concerned about that complexity. I think we have that much risk and complexity in a human system without the AI. So whereas I fear a world in which AI might make a value judgment, we're making pretty bad value judgments, and we're turning weapons on ourselves, and we're doing that already. So alone, I don't see that as a decision rule to say whether that's good or bad.
But what I see here is the potential for us. I don't think we need AI to look into the mirror. So my metaphor that I use is that technology is a magnifying mirror. First, it reflects who we are, because it has all our dreams and our fears, our hopes, the best of us and the worst of us, our good and our evil. And so there are people today who would kill us all if they had their hands on certain types of technology, themselves included, by the way, right? Mm-hmm. And so we are covering the full spectrum, but we are not looking into the mirror, and we don't need AI for that, and we're not trying to change our personal behavior. So for example, let me make it more personal for you and put it as a challenge. I said we killed 75 billion animals, and if you look how they live every year, it's basically a concentration camp like Auschwitz, only much more efficient and effective. They live and they die by our will in tremendous suffering, right? And my mother-in-law is from Rochester, so I was a very good son-in-law. For most of the time, I could eat 3 steaks when I go and visit her house. A couple of years ago, I couldn't do it anymore. And so 2 years ago, me and my wife went totally vegan. And I think what I've discovered is one of the best things for me personally in terms of health, the best for our planet, it's good for the animals. But one of the other things which I don't talk about often enough, it's very good for artificial intelligence actually. Because if artificial intelligence follows the current precedent that we have right now, how we treat the animal and they treat us the same way, we're doomed. So the only hope we can have is to set a good precedent and to say, it's not okay to say, I'm smarter than you, therefore I can eat you. right? That's not okay, and we want to be treated the same way. So, and which is one of the reasons why I think it's very important to start having good precedents.
Yeah, I wouldn't rely on a precedent. I think we need a really good algorithm. I don't. Good point, though.
But aren't you afraid we're avoiding responsibility? Because then you're saying, do as I say and don't do as I do.
No, I just question whether or not we're going to relinquish our sovereignty on some of these questions. Now, you could say that's already happening and it's going to happen, but I don't think we're doing that on purpose. I don't think we are saying, hey, look at my history and the way I've treated animals and take over. I don't think that is out there.
But don't you think we're going down that road with things like predictive policing, where we are using software to try to anticipate, what's good or bad?
And I think that's why we're having this conversation, but I don't think that we can change our human behavior for 5 years of our thousands of years history and hope that the machines pick up on that and say, it's like getting your retirement cost at your last salary, It's like, no, it's not going to work that way. We're going to be judged across the entire
So if we can't change our human behavior, right, to deal with that, which humans are going to write those algorithms?
No, I think we should change it, yeah. I think we should change our human behavior regardless. It's a good and
Let me give you a Canadian example, and as Mark here was telling us jokingly before that, because I live in Toronto, Canada, and he's saying a Canadian is just a disarmed American with free health care. So, in Toronto, if you're black, you're 100 times more likely to be carded than if you're white. And we have about, like on a bad year, we have 6 times less crime than, let's say, Chicago. We're bigger than Chicago. And on a good year, we have 12 times less crime of any kind in Toronto. So we're a pretty good place. Even in a place like that, and 70% of the population in Toronto was born outside of Canada, not Toronto, Canada. They're like me, who went there from somewhere else. 70%. Who's going to write those algorithms now?
And I have to tell you, and I'm sorry for jumping in on this every time, but as a black person, I know that there's a bias being programmed into some of these things that we may use for that. But I would much rather deal with that level of bias from a machine that may card me 6 times more than 100 times more. I think I'm going to be a lot better off. I think
Why
biases? Well, I just think that I would rather put it into something that's capable of learning than something that recursively itself, its bias continues generation after generation. But I do think that if something is biased and can learn, and learns that...
But the Toronto police has been learning for 300 years.
Yes, but it's human, and it doesn't scale, the Toronto police. And that's one of the advantages that I think we should deal with, is the fact that a machine, even with our biases, may be more able to self-correct than we with our cultural, our evolutionary psyche. It doesn't have one of these things back here. It doesn't have the monkey mind. It has other problems. But in some senses, and we've talked about sentencing and those kinds of things, I would like to see how they work, because there could be a lot of removal of biases in society if we started at least comparing how the machine says this person should be sentenced to this many years, and the human judge says this person should go to jail for life. And then we look at outcomes, and then we look at data. And I know that bias is still there, but I'm willing to give it a shot, because our human bias has proven that over thousands of years, it is not self-correct.
But part of your assumption has been all those panel stuff, they mentioned the word algorithms and algorithms, but a big part of this, the intelligence that we're talking about, is the data. And so a lot of the problems with the artificial intelligence
is with the data,
is with the data, not necessarily algorithms. So
garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, and so, Doug's point about if a human is incapable of being blind in many contexts, but maybe the algorithms can achieve greater empathy.
Yeah, and we have data for this now with resumes and 100 resumes and a human goes through that file and a machine goes through that file and both are biased, but one is less biased. So,
Actually, I have and maybe this is my final comment, but I do have a case in point. When I was a young assistant professor and I would submit proposals, I used to write my full name, J. Sri Ramanathan, got rejected, same proposal, send it next year, called myself Dr. J, got accepted. So yeah, the name communicated a lot. So.
let me tell you about my kid's name sometime.
I think we've had a tremendous discussion tonight, but I would like to ask you to consider this as an invitation rather than as a conclusion. So it's just an opening of a conversation which we all have the opportunity, and I would even argue the responsibility to follow through and continue on our own terms. But this is a good point perhaps to open for questions from the audience. We went into a very interesting, unpredictable discussion tonight, as those things usually work. They're a living thing. So let's see now what our audience would want to talk us about. Yes, sir.
With all that you guys discussed this evening, is ethical AI even attainable?
Attained or attainable?
Attainable.
Attainable. Mr. Dr. Zhang, maybe you want to start about that, and then we'll go to our ethicists.
The whole AI community spent a lot of effort recently talking about ethics. I have to say this is a new concept to researchers in the field. We're still learning from other fields to say how to realize ethical AI. But I think it's very important. Say all AI algorithms make mistakes. When something goes wrong, who takes the responsibility? How the AI can follow the rules we humans have? And a lot of these questions are still open. So I think there's still a long way to go, but this is the time that we should focus on these questions.
Mark?
I have no clue. I think it's possible to, in fact, I know it's possible, for example, logicians have been able to, and I've seen some of these, have been able to translate moral principles into logical notation. So the question, could a machine follow a pattern of understanding certain principles, logically change, and sort of put that together into an outcome that then says this is what the moral outcome is? Yes, I think that's definitely possible. You could have a machine that would do that. The problem I see, and I don't know because I don't have a computer science background, there are competing theories of ethics, right? So I consider myself a Rawlsian in a lot of the ways I approach things, which is sort of a Kantian, but then there's the utilitarian, and then there's the virtue ethicist, and there's the... So if you ask what the right outcome is, we have certain considered judgments, right? When I say Nazis are bad, aside from neo-Nazis, nobody thinks Nazis are good. That's not even a discussion, right? But there are other areas where it's not that clear cut. What the Kantian says and what the Rawlsian says and what the utilitarian says are very different, but have very different sort of outcomes. That's where I think it's more problematic. And the question is, why do we think we make better judgments than strictly adhering to one moral theory? I think it's because sometimes we do make ad hoc decisions that are actually probably morally the right decision. So I might be a thoroughgoing Kantian, but sometimes I say, yeah, you can't sacrifice a human life, and it's beyond all price. And then you tell me 1 million people will die if one person doesn't. And I might just say, even though that one person has no responsibility here, I'm not sure there's a threshold in which Kantianism gives to utilitarian. That kind of reasoning, I'm unclear whether a machine can do that kind of at least I know, I'm fairly certain now it can't. But the question is, what would that look like later on when a machine could actually, could weigh competing moral theories and come up with a sort of unique answer to a situation? That's the troubling part. Then I'm not sure whether machines will get there, or when they'll get there, or how they will get there.
Let me make this even more troubling for you, if you want. I think the nature of intelligence is that it's inherently unpredictable. So when you have a child, the best you can do is to give that child, that's not good. The best thing you can do for that child is to give it, quote, the best programming. So So you take the child to the best schools, etc., etc. You have no guarantee how that child is going to turn out. You can try and teach them those moral principles. But just like with machine learning, you have so much control to feed that child data point. And by the way, teaching by example is crucial with children, I think. Because children listen maybe 10% of the time, but they watch you 100% of the time. So if we behave like children, the way we behave with our machine